colonizer and you were brutalizing Palestinians day in and day out for over 50 years, sure, there's no way you're going to find fault with the brutality of Israeli police on a daily basis, much less an attack on al-Aqsa Mosque compound. Having said that, I think it was very clear to the entire world what was happening, and that's why we saw blanket condemnation of these Israeli measures. We saw blanket condemnation as well of the racist marches of Israeli settlers who are completely unhinged and protected by Israeli soldiers, marching through occupied Jerusalem, chanting death to Arabs. So the provocations, the sparks of this escalation have, they were there, they were accumulating over days, specifically throughout the month of Ramadan, when even the access of Palestinian Jerusalemites to areas they traditionally go to after breaking their fast, like the Damascus Gate, was restricted. The writing was all over the wall, but because of very petty political calculus, it was allowed to continue. These are the allies of Benjamin Netanyahu, and he wanted to show them that he's still their friend. And now we are where we are because of all of that. This is, anyways, the Israeli courts are part and parcel of the regime of colonial occupation. And report after report, study after study prove that they are no more than tools to provide cover for the dispossession of Palestinians and the systematic discrimination against Palestinians. We have yet to see a court rule in favor of Palestinian families fighting for their property. Israel legislates laws to ensure that Palestinians are discriminated against, while Israeli settlers and settler organizations can claim land and property belonging to Palestinians who actually have legitimate claim and deeds of their properties cannot do the same in what is now recognized as Israel proper. So the argument is a bit upside down, but again, that's not surprising given the fact that we're talking about a colonial regime trying to market itself when it is so clearly exposed for what it is. The issue in Jerusalem is not one of a real estate dispute. It's one of a colonial occupation. There is occupier and occupied. Denying that fact, making it look otherwise, doesn't change the fact. That is the fact. Palestinians are in Jerusalem, of course. Their numbers are increasing. Well, we have families just like all other humans. But at the end of the day, we're not in Jerusalem because life is good and Israel is treating us well. We're in Jerusalem because that's our homeland. And we have every right to stay. And we have every right to move freely between Jerusalem and Palestinian cities. It's not immigration. It's the right to freedom of movement. I think the Biden administration simply doesn't have the backbone or the interest, really, to realign U.S. policy with international law, to realign U.S. policy with the growing consensus among Americans, especially the constituents of this administration, the Democratic Party, to support Palestinian rights, to support international law, and to reject this blank check for Israeli violations and Israeli actions, and to bankroll these violations as well, to finally condition military aid to Israel, which is a military superpower in the region. All of these things would be in the interest of the American administration. I don't see it happening, although strategically speaking, I see that the trend is moving in the right direction, and that more and more U.S. Elected officials are aligning their positions with the moral and the logical way to go, which is to say that there has to be a standard upon which we have relations with countries, and they must apply to all. The exceptionalism that Israel has enjoyed for more than 50 years, that has allowed it to do all of these things, has to stop. And this arrogance with which Palestinians are treated is simply untenable.
Thank you. Tensions have been simmering for weeks in occupied East Jerusalem. But on Monday, the situation took a dangerous turn when Israeli police stormed the al-Aqsa Mosque compound injuring hundreds of Palestinians. The armed group Hamas responded by firing rockets into Israel, which in turn sparked the airstrikes on Gaza. More than 24 Palestinians were killed, among them 9 children in the Israeli attacks. And at least 2 Israeli women were killed by the rockets. Hamas had warned it would act after the raid on al-Aqsa, when Israeli police used rubber bullets, stun grenades and tear gas. Occupied East Jerusalem had been on edge anyway, because Palestinian families are being threatened with eviction from their homes. Israeli settlers have waged legal battles in an attempt to force the Palestinians from the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood.